We've come across this video from Mark Rippetoe, who was one of the OGs of strength training. He's come up with Starting Strength, one of the kind of original barbell beginner programs.
Actually is the case, and here's why. This is the scapula.
And he has unjustly taken apart RPE training.
RPE. If anybody would like to comment on whether they think Yusuf says RPE like a pirate, feel free to get in touch. RPE.
Thank you for taking my question. Oh, but I hadn't taken it yet. I hate RPE. It's so frustrating.
So in the video, Mark Rippetoe says something to the effect of RPE is just a way to sell programs as templates so that you don't have to speak to the client about the weight on the bar. And I think anytime he also says something weird at the beginning of the video, like he insults people who like live in New York or something from memory.
Yeah, it seems like someone's asked about RPE, and the first thing he does is take the mick out of him for living in New York and then have a bit of a go at the pandemic.
Yeah. Like red flag 1 and 2.
Because you live in New York City, you're not a free individual. If you're still in New York City, it is like serving a sentence for a crime. And what is the crime? Stupidity. That's the crime you committed.
And then just makes like a sweeping statement about something that's used by like lots of strength coaches in like sports, powerlifting, bodybuilding, and just says it's just this.
It's just a way to make it okay to lift light weights. That's all RPE is. And it's been developed as a way to sell services so that you don't have to interact with your clients.
You know why they use RPE? Let me tell you what RPE is. RPE is a way to sell programs as templates without having to actually consult the client in terms of the numbers on the bar. Developed for strength training as a way to sell services. I know this for a fact. All right? That's all it was for. It's so you could handle 200 clients without having to actually interact with them about the numbers on the bar. Well, you just go up to RPE of 7.38 and do something there.
Or that it's a way to allow yourself to lift less weight than last week.
RPE, rating of perceived exertion, is a way to make it okay to lift light weights. All right.
And all you need to do, if you want to get stronger, is have cantaloupe-sized balls and just stop being a pussy.
It's absolute stupidity. If you are using RPE as a way to give yourself permission to be a fucking pussy that day. But those of us with giant cantaloupe-sized balls. So this RPE shit needs to go away.
So
That's
I think
it.
it would be good to unpack that to start with.
That's that statement. So he starts off by saying it's just an excuse to lift light weights. So I think he justifies that in the video by saying sometimes you go in the gym, you do your warm-up set, and it feels terrible. And you think that felt terrible, but you still did it. And then you do another set, and you think that felt terrible, you still did it. I think he's saying that if you go by the RPE way of programming, you would have downregulated that and done less weight and not necessarily progressed week to week. I think that at the heart of all of this, he just misunderstands like how RPE is supposed to be used in like the reps in reserve context, at least.
But his assumption there is it felt hard, therefore it was a high RPE.
Yeah. And that like arbitrarily saying I'm doing this week for this many reps, no matter what, is a better way of running a program. Because like just because the bar load is fixed week to week or like programmed by a percentage or programmed by some other means, there's nothing to say that that won't also be too light for whatever you're capable of on the day. Because what if you progress faster than the program?
Yeah, that's a
then
good
it
point.
would his number would be too light. So he's just saying that like it should all be really hard and you should always try really hard, and as long as you do that, then it works. I just think there's a bit more nuance to it than that, unfortunately.
You
But
just got to
he's
stop
missing.
being a pussy. Just lift harder and grow cantaloupe-sized balls, and then you'd be fine. But yeah,
What do you think about that as a strategy of like ignore recovery capacity, ignore how you like perform or feel on a day, and just always try harder?
what could possibly go wrong with that? Yeah, he's based his criticism around a single event that he was talking about when he was doing 3 sets of 5, classic,
Surprise,
and
surprise.
he said, I realized that my perceptions of my effort are unreliable because the bar speed was the same across all 3 sets. Now, ironically, if he was following an RPE program and using some kind of objective measure of his bar speed, filming it or using a bar speed tracker, then that would be totally fine.
So I think a lot of people. I don't want to like mischaracterize. Like obviously, I've worked with Mike Toucher for a long time. I don't want to like mischaracterize his teachings, or because he obviously popularized the concept in strength training and powerlifting. But I've always been encouraged to use multiple data points. So if you have a way of tracking your bar speed, like I think the first thing is like at the end of the set, not how hard was that, because that's a very difficult thing to get you to wrap your head around. But saying how many more reps do I think I could have done? I think in a lot of the data, people are pretty accurate about that rating. Generally, like even in relatively untrained people, they have a pretty good feeling of it's not going to be exactly right, but if you're not going to think you could have done 10 when actually you could have done 2 and vice versa, like you're going to be broadly correct. So you have that measure, and then you have ideally like a video. So watch back, and Mark even says this in the footage. I watched back a video and I realized like the reps were similar. So you look at the video and you go, I think I could have done 2 more. It's like, does it look like I could have done 2 more reps? Yeah, it does. And then even better, you have some sort of very objective measure. You have measure the velocity of the bar. There's lots of devices and apps that allow you to do that. Those things combined, I could have done 2 more reps. So therefore, it's an RPE 8. And that's a way of having a common conversation about what that set was to you, what intensity that was versus what you were capable of.
Something feeling hard is correlated but not tied to how many reps you can do. So we've all done a heavy single that you couldn't have done another rep, but it felt really good to do that single.
Yeah.
We've also all done like a really nasty set of split squats that just felt horrible everywhere. But you probably, if you had to, there was maybe another 4 or 5 reps in the tank.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he's just assuming that someone writes a program and they don't want to put the effort in to prescribe a load. So they write RPE 8.
So this is the other thing of it's been only developed as a way to sell services so that you don't have to interact with clients. Now, I would argue you develop anything to sell services. I don't think that's a discreditation of the system, because starting strength is selling books and selling a system. But if anything, that's selling RPE as a system that doesn't require a coach. If anything, is a more noble mission, because that's saying we're going to give you all the tools to regulate your training yourself. It's not really doing himself. I don't think Mike Toucher has done himself out of business by not hanging his method on having to go through him personally.
To be honest, I actually think it's the opposite. So
There's only so many people he can take on.
No, like in the sense that I think it's prescribing something as an RPE is really, I think, more useful when you are communicating with clients. Because I think what is difficult is how do you have, like you and I both do a set of 5. It has to be 5, right? Because that's your strength base. You and I do the set of 5. And I'm like, okay, so there's 2 ways we can look at like the load you pick. One of them is we use an arbitrary moving target that's probably inaccurate on a day-to-day basis, which is your max on that exercise. And we take a percentage of that and we use another framework to say probably at 75% you could do this many reps, so let's do a set of 5 with it and it should be fairly easy, right? As a way of programming, in an accumulation block or an intensification block or whatever. And I'm coaching you and I say like, how was your set of 5? And you might be like, yeah, it was okay. But it's very hard. Like it's all still arbitrary, like a percentage, the load, whether we pick the load at random, whether we do it by a percentage, or whether we say it's an RPE, we still have to have the conversation of, was that the training effect? Did that create the training effect that we were trying to create? what do we think the intensity actually was? And it's all really just a conversation about intensity versus what you were capable of. And RPE is a way of doing that. But I think saying that, oh yeah, that makes it easier to write a cookie cutter template, I actually think it's harder because there's so much more to explain. Why would you not just say do 10 reps or do a challenging 10 reps? Like, why would you go to the effort of trying to then program in RPEs over time? Like, it adds a layer of complexity and explanation that doesn't need to be there.
Mark Rippetoe was someone who I think we both read his book, Starting Strength.
Long time ago. Yeah.
And it's difficult to get a feel for someone from reading a book that they've written. It was a very technical book. There was lots of diagrams of angles and force, shear force and compression and different anatomical arguments made in the book for squatting with your head down and so on. But when you see him on video, and I think this is maybe just as he's evolved into an older man and become a little bit more labile and a bit more loose, is that
Great
he
word.
says some things which you're just like, that. He ended that video with, if you don't progress on your squat, you should blame it on your ovarian situation.
Yeah.
Like, just
Weird.
yellow flag that he said there.
If you want to lift light weights, just lift the goddamn light weights. I don't care. If you want to keep your squat at 285 the rest of your life, go ahead. Fine with me. But don't blame it on RPE. Blame it on your flared up ovarian situation.
And then there's also some things that I think when COVID kicked off, and we talked about this on a video called How Not to Do Copywriting, where we mentioned that there's a certain avatar of online American Christian creator who does like marketing stuff, and then very gradually, whenever there's a current thing, particularly to do with gun laws or COVID or something like that, they just suddenly all of their content flips a switch and just goes hard into that. And it's almost like they lose sight of what their original product is, and they just suddenly use the internet as a soapbox. So that it was a very consistent trend that we see. A lot of people that have kind of alpha or warrior or masculinity or wolf in their branding as well. Not everyone, but a lot of them tend to go through that shift as well. But we have this here from one of the forums where someone has said, and I'm going to read this out: do not bargain or comply with anything a woman says at this point. They're all basically terrorists and need a 10-week beatdown as a whole gender, literally physical beatdown camp, to distend the inflated ego that somehow got created. They know how to play good cop, bad cop. And this one reasonable lady showed up blood in the water for sharks to turn up the heat, because if someone gives a reasonable argument with a man, the power will back down. At this point, women will only be dealt with blah, 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 bullshit, hive mind nonsense, wise the fuck up. So
That was Mark Rippetoe saying that.
No, that was someone in the forum, very drenched in incel type attitude there.
Which forum?
I assume the Starting Strength one, but they haven't.
Oh, I see. Right.
And then Mark has responded, an interesting take. I know some women who would agree with this, which kind of muddies the water. It's not super incriminating, but I think it's the fact that Mark hasn't just gone, that is a mental thing to say.
Don't post it in my forum.
Yeah.
Or just delete the comment. Yeah.
But I suppose like someone with a high profile is likely to get cancelled from this kind of stuff.
I think that's the second part of all of this, right? Is that like, how do you navigate these things if you're trying to decide, is RPE a good idea? And like, who's Mark Rippetoe? Oh, he wrote Starting Strength. Oh yeah, like loads of people follow him. Oh, he's worked in the industry for all these years, and he thinks it's a gimmick. And he's got this platform where he can say that sort of thing, and yeah, people react to it. But like, it doesn't get. It's so tricky, isn't it? And this is just in the fitness industry. It's in everything in the internet where that's not reviewed by an objective third party and taken down as misinformation or like overly aggressive opinion for the sake of starting a fight. It's still there on the internet. And I think like most people in fitness, most strength coaches trying to coach their clients would agree that he's not right about that. Yeah, he's an authority in fitness that that has that opinion, and that's there on YouTube now, that RPE is a gimmick.
It's a very difficult problem to unpick of the internet, and I'm sure there's a clever blockchain solution where, similar to the way that Wikipedia is moderated, where there's a kind of group verification of facts and so on. But still, it's subject to, no matter what technology you use, it's still, as you say, subject to popularity and charisma and confidence with someone making a ridiculous claim. And that's why the people who are most popular in the fitness industry are not necessarily the ones who speak the most objective truth. They're not the best evidence-based fitness people, are they?
They're the most polarizing. Because equally, even if it went through down the route of let's almost crowdsource the verification, we had a run-in with Lyle McDonald where he like threatened to send his followers on us, or set his followers on us. And if he's got a group of people behind him, as most like figureheads in any industry do, who are willing to just do whatever to back the support of what the person they're following, I'm sure if Mark Rippetoe wanted to get all his followers to upvote something or say something was verified or whatever, he'd get that. You know, how incentivized are people who think RPE is fairly legit to go and fight the fight on the other side? It's a minefield, to be honest.
It becomes a situation where the more of a, and I've seen this a lot with the Herbalife stuff that we've done, and some of the comments, something like, I'm going to find the quote. Oh, here we go. It's in my Alfred. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
Criticizing it being a doctor.
No, that's just a famous quote.
I see.
So people who are very adamantly pro Herbalife, because they are Herbalife reps,
Oh, I see what you mean.
of course they're going to defend it because their salary depends on it. So you can't use someone who makes money from a thing to be an objective assessor of whether that thing is good or not. Similarly, we've seen a chat with Rippetoe and Tushera, and Touche, they did a kind of, I guess you could call it a debate together, where it's been memed because Rippetoe is very much drinking the Kool-Aid of heavy fives are the way to get strong. And you can see him trying to shoehorn that statement into the podcast. And Mike Tushera is not really agreeing with it, but he's trying to be gracious and just being like, okay, yeah, fives are all right.
What do you think about heavy fives for everybody that trains? Sets of five. So you do a lot of fives in your training. Further away from you that you get from your sets of five base.
Yeah.
The further away you're going to get from your base strength.
But it's I think there's the red flags across both that video, that interview, and the stuff that we've just looked at is that Mark speaks in absolutes, doesn't he? There's no, it's not RPE has some use cases and can be useful in some circumstances. It's just like the only reason that this exists is this. Like, that's it, put in the box. And he tries to do the same thing in the interview with Mike where he's saying, but so you use heavy fives and that's how you train and you find yourself using fives in your training and all that sort of stuff. And I guess, to most people in fitness, like fives, sets of five are like something you can do. Like they're an option. There's nothing magical about them. They're not more magical than a set of four or a set of six, other than they're used in Mark's branding and starting strength.
We've got the stakes prepared.
Part of it.
Just don't do a set of seven, because if the strength range is 1 to 6 and the hypertrophy range is 8 to 12, then if you do 7, you're in the gainless chasm. So if you ever find doing like
we've
a
shared
heavy
an image of that, haven't we?
Yeah, I'll get the image, because obviously if you're approaching failure, you have to squeeze out that final rep or stop short of 7, because otherwise you've wasted your time.
I can remember being in the gym, like in my first couple of years in the gym, and there was some guys in there doing sets of 7 on an easy bar curl. And I remember thinking, like, idiots. Who's doing a set of 7? Like, why would you do a set of 7?
Because we've been looking at like Prilipin's chart.
Exactly, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do. I'll have been going through a block where I dropped from doing 8 to 12s to 6 to 8s. And that was I'm in my like special, my progression cycle. And these jokers are just doing sets of 7 for no reason. Idiots.
Absolute twats.
What a mistake to have made.